The chandeliers of Harrington Hall burned with 1,000 trembling lights, their crystal prisms scattering gold across silk gowns and polished marble. Yet none of that brilliance could soften the cruelty that moved through the ballroom like a cold draught. It was the sort of evening society adored, perfumed, orchestral, merciless. Every smile concealed an assessment. Every bow was an inventory of worth. And standing just beyond the brightest circle of admiration was Miss Eliza Ashcombe, already marked by the quiet consensus that she did not belong at the center of anything. She stood beside a marble column veined like old parchment, her gloved hands folded with deliberate composure, her posture impeccable in the way learned by those who must defend themselves without weapons. Her gown was tasteful, ivory silk, modestly cut, carefully mended where last season's fashion had frayed, but it lacked the theatrical excess that drew attention. Eliza had never inspired gasps. She inspired, at best, polite acknowledgement, and at worst, the sort of neglect that felt like erasure. Nearby, her youngest sister, Arabella, bloomed beneath admiration like a rose fed too generously. Laughter gathered around her in warm clusters. Gentlemen leaned closer, enchanted by her brightness, her effortless beauty, her confidence born of lifelong approval. Their father hovered proudly at her side, a man grown soft on borrowed fortunes and fading relevance, eager to trade charm for security. Eliza watched him with an ache she kept carefully buried, for hope, once indulged, was a treacherous thing. The music paused. A ripple of attention moved through the room as the master of ceremonies announced the arrival of the Duke of Ravensmere, late, as dukes so often were, and therefore instantly forgiven. His name passed from mouth to mouth like a spark. Wealth, power, influence, marriageable. Every mother straightened, every daughter calculated. Eliza did not move. She had learned that anticipation was another form of humiliation. Before the Duke could even be seen, her father laughed too loudly at some passing remark, the sound sharpened by desperation. "Well," he said, his voice carrying farther than he intended, "if his grace is in search of a bride, he need only marry the pretty one." The words landed with a softness that made them worse. There was a heartbeat of silence, then the restrained amusement of society. Titters behind fans, glances exchanged with practiced discretion. Pretty one. The phrase settled neatly over Arabella, crowning her without question, while Eliza felt its shadow fall upon her like a verdict. Her father did not look at her. He did not need to. The room had already done so, and found her wanting. Heat crept up Eliza's neck, but her face remained calm, her expression schooled into neutrality by years of similar moments. She neither flinched nor fled. To do so would have been to confirm the judgment. Instead, she lifted her chin slightly, as though the remark had brushed past her without consequence. Inside, something smaller than heartbreak and sharper than anger folded inward, making itself easier to carry. Arabella laughed, a musical sound, and touched their father's arm with indulgent affection. "Papa, you are dreadful," she said, though her eyes gleamed. Around them, approval settled back into place. Order was restored. The unattractive truth had been spoken and promptly dismissed. Eliza turned her gaze toward the far doors just as they opened at last. The Duke of Ravensmere entered without ceremony, tall and composed, his dark coat severe against the glow of the hall. He did not smile as others did upon arrival. His expression was watchful, reserved, as though he had stepped into the room already aware of its teeth. Conversations shifted to accommodate him. Bodies angled subtly in his direction, yet he did not hurry forward. His eyes moved slowly, deliberately, taking in faces, gestures, silences. When his gaze reached Eliza, it paused. It was not the lingering appraisal she was accustomed to, those quick, dismissive glances that slid away once they failed to find ornament. This was something else. Consideration, perhaps, or recognition. She felt it like a hand laid lightly at her back. For a moment too long, the noise of the ballroom receded, and Eliza wondered, absurdly, if she had imagined it. Then her stepmother's voice cut through the air, cool and precise. "Eliza, she said, beckoning with two fingers, do try not to look so solemn. This is a celebration." Eliza inclined her head and obeyed, stepping forward into the light she had been trying to avoid. Around her, the laughter resumed, smoother now, as though the interruption had never occurred. Yet somewhere beyond the circle of sound, the Duke remained very still, his attention fixed, and the ballroom, so certain of its judgments, did not yet realize it had miscalculated. The morning after the ball arrived pale and rain-washed, as though the sky itself wished to cleanse the memory of whispered laughter. Eliza Ashcombe sat at the small escritoire in her bedchamber, hands folded, spine straight, listening to the distant clatter of carriages departing the square below. Sleep had come fitfully, interrupted by the echo of her father's careless words and the far more unsettling recollection of a duke's steady gaze. She told herself, with practiced discipline, that it had meant nothing. Attention, like cruelty, often arrived uninvited and departed just as swiftly. By noon, the household had resumed its ordinary rhythms. Arabella hummed while selecting ribbons. Their stepmother issued instructions with crisp authority. Eliza moved quietly through these familiar patterns, determined to let the night fade into insignificance. It was then that the footman appeared at the parlor door, his expression uncertain, as though he carried something fragile and improper. He held a small parcel wrapped in brown paper, tied with twine, unadorned and unmistakably addressed to Miss Eliza Ashcombe. The room stilled. Arabella's hum faltered. Their stepmother's gaze sharpened. Eliza felt the sudden, dangerous weight of being seen. She accepted the parcel with a murmur of thanks, aware of how the twine bit into her glove, grounding her against a flicker of panic. She did not open it at once. That restraint, learned early, had always been her armor. Only when she reached the privacy of the garden did she untie the knot. Inside lay a book, an old volume of poetry, its leather spines softened by age, its margins faintly marked by careful hand. Tucked within was a pressed sprig of winter jasmine, impossibly intact. No card bore a name, yet none was needed. Eliza closed the book slowly, her breath unsteady. It was not a grand gesture. It was infinitely wise. It was intimate. By afternoon, the whispers had begun. Society possessed a talent for invention, and it worked swiftly. A duke did not send books to women without meaning. A woman did not receive them without ambition. At the milliner's, two ladies paused mid-sentence as Eliza passed. In the street, a gentleman tipped his hat with exaggerated curiosity. Even the servants' glances lingered longer than courtesy required. Eliza felt the city rearranging itself around her, as though an invisible line had been drawn, and she stood suddenly upon it. At tea, Arabella could no longer contain herself. "Is it true," she asked lightly, "that His Grace has taken an interest in you?" The question hovered, sharp-edged and sweetly spoken. Their stepmother's spoon stilled against porcelain. Eliza met her sister's gaze, seeing not malice, but bewilderment. Beauty had always been Arabella's currency. This unfamiliar economy unsettled her. "I have received a book," Eliza replied carefully. "Nothing more." Their stepmother smiled. "Books are rarely nothing," she said, "especially from men who can afford better gifts." That evening, a card arrived, an invitation to a small music hall hosted by Lady Fenwick, whose drawing room thrived on proximity to influence. Eliza's name was written in an unfamiliar hand, precise and elegant. There was no signature, yet the implication was unmistakable. Declining would be noticed. Accepting would be interpreted. The choice felt less like agency and more like surrender to momentum. At the music hall, the air was thick with perfume and speculation. Eliza took her seat near the wall, acutely aware of every whisper that traced her presence. When the Duke of Ravensmere entered, conversation faltered, then reassembled itself around him. He did not seek her immediately. Instead, he spoke with Lady Fenwick, listened to a sonata, observed. The delay was excruciating. It allowed rumor to ferment. When at last he crossed the room, he did so without haste. "Miss Ashcombe," he said, bowing, his voice low and even. "I'm pleased you came." The simplicity of the statement unsettled her more than any flourish might have. "As am I, Your Grace," she replied, aware that dozens of ears leaned imperceptibly closer. They spoke briefly, of the music, of the poet whose book he had sent. Nothing improper passed between them. Yet when he offered his arm to escort her to supper, the gesture struck the room like flint. A murmur followed them, swelling, reshaping itself into something sharper than curiosity. By the following morning, the rumor had teeth. Eliza overheard it in fragments, suggestions of strategy, insinuations of gratitude misread as encouragement. Her father alternated between pride and alarm. Her stepmother watched her with new calculation. Eliza herself felt suspended between dread and a fragile, forbidden warmth. Attention, she realized, was not protection. It was exposure, and the cost was only beginning to reveal itself. Dusk gathered slowly over the city, drawing a veil of indigo across rooftops and chimneys, and in its quiet descent offered Eliza Ashcombe the rare mercy of anonymity. She walked alone through the private garden behind Lady Fenwick's townhouse, gravel whispering beneath her slippers, the air damp with the promise of rain. Lanterns glowed at measured intervals, their lights softened by climbing roses now stripped of bloom. This was a place meant for reflection, not revelation, yet her pulse knew otherwise. She had not expected him to follow. Indeed, she had hoped he would not. The rumors had grown too loud, their edges too sharp. Each day had pressed upon her like a narrowing corridor, and she had come here seeking only the solace of shadow. When she heard footsteps behind her, unhurried, deliberate, she stopped, the decision forming before fear could undo it. "Miss Ashcombe," the Duke of Ravensmere said, his voice measured, respectful, carrying none of the entitlement others wore so casually. "Forgive the intrusion." She turned to face him. In the lantern light, his features were gentled, the severity she had first observed tempered by something almost weary. "Your Grace," she replied, "you need not apologize. This garden belongs to no one at present." "On the contrary," he said softly, "it seems to belong precisely to you." The words unsettled her. She clasped her hands together, as though to anchor herself. "I had hoped for a moment's quiet," she admitted. "These days, it is difficult to come by." "I am aware," he said, and there was no mistaking the weight behind it. "I wish to speak with you privately, before the noise distorts what little truth remains." Silence stretched between them, charged and fragile. Somewhere beyond the walls, a carriage rattled over stone. Eliza lifted her gaze. "Then speak, sir. I fear the truth grows more elusive with every hour." He drew a breath, as though steadying himself against a tide. "I did not send that book thoughtlessly," he began, "nor did I seek your company as a diversion. I am painfully aware of what my attention has cost you." Her composure wavered. "Then why," she asked, quietly but firmly, "did you offer it at all?" "Because you were alone," he almost said. "Because you were unguarded in a room full of armor." Instead, he answered with restraint. "Because I recognized something in you that society overlooks, and I have grown weary of pretending that such blindness is virtue." The confession landed gently, yet its impact was profound. Eliza felt the careful wall she had built tremble. "You do not know me," she said. "Not truly." "No," he agreed. "But I know what it is to be surrounded and unseen." The admission surprised her. Dukes were not meant to confess such things. Encouraged despite herself, she spoke before caution could intervene. "I have spent my life perfecting invisibility," she said. "It is safer than hope. Hope invites disappointment, and disappointment is rarely born alone." His expression softened, and for the first time she saw something unguarded there. "Hope," he said, "is a risk I have avoided for different reasons. Duty leaves little room for it. Every choice I make is weighed, measured, decided before I arrive. I find I resent that certainty." They stood closer now, though neither had moved. The air between them seemed to hold its breath. Eliza laughed softly, without mirth. "You speak of resentment," she said, "yet you wield power I cannot imagine. I am not free to disappoint only myself." "Nor am I," he replied. "I simply disappoint others first." The candor drew a smile from her, tentative and fleeting. It felt like trespass, sharing such truth beneath borrowed lanterns, yet neither stepped away. Rain began to fall, light and uncertain, stippling the path and darkening the earth. He removed his coat without ceremony and held it over her, a gesture so instinctive it startled them both. "Thank you," she murmured, aware of his nearness, the warmth that defied propriety. "Eliza," he said, her name shaped with care, "if my attention has placed you in peril, say so, and I will withdraw." The offer was honorable. It was also devastating. She searched his face, finding sincerity unmarred by pride. "If you withdraw," she said slowly, "the rumors will not vanish. They will only conclude I was dismissed." His jaw tightened. "Then tell me what you wish." She hesitated, the moment balancing on the edge of truth. "I wish," she said, "to be regarded honestly, neither elevated nor discarded. I wish to choose, for once, without being chosen as spectacle." He inclined his head, a gesture of respect rather than acquiescence. "Then allow me time," he said. "And courage." Thunder murmured distantly, a warning rather than a threat. From the garden gate came the sound of voices, approaching, curious. The shadows were thinning. Eliza stepped back, returning his coat, her expression composed once more. Yet something irrevocable had shifted. As they parted, neither saw the figure lingering just beyond the hedge, nor guessed how swiftly private truth would be tested by public consequence. The night returned them to Harrington Hall, as though fate itself insisted on symmetry. Chandeliers once more flung light across gilt mirrors. Musicians tuned their instruments with ritual patience, and society gathered with sharpened expectation. Word had traveled swiftly, reshaped by mouths eager for consequence. This was no ordinary assembly. It was a reckoning disguised as a celebration, and every guest arrived prepared to witness either triumph or correction. Eliza entered on her father's arm, her steps measured, her expression serene enough to be mistaken for confidence. She wore a gown of deep pearl gray, unadorned save for a single brooch at her throat, its design modest, its symbolism lost on those who noticed it only to dismiss it. Her stepmother surveyed the room with proprietary pride, pausing just long enough to ensure Eliza remained half a pace behind Arabella, whose rose-colored silk bloomed obediently beneath approving eyes. The Duke of Ravensmere had not yet arrived. Conversation eddied around Eliza, touching but never quite including her. She heard fragments, her name spoken with speculation, with derision, with curiosity newly sharpened by the promise of resolution. Some believed the Duke would correct his error this evening, selecting beauty where he had briefly dallied with novelty. Others anticipated scandal, savoring the discomfort it would bring. Eliza listened without reacting. Whatever occurred, she had resolved to endure it with dignity intact. The orchestra fell silent. A hush swept the room as the Duke entered, his presence commanding without display. He wore black, severe and unmistakable, the cut of his coat emphasizing restraint rather than indulgence. His gaze moved through the crowd, pausing briefly on Arabella, who smiled with practiced charm, then drifting onward until it found Eliza. The recognition that was immediate, unguarded. Something in her chest tightened, equal parts solace and fear. Introductions were made, though none were needed. Lady Harrington, radiant with anticipation, guided the Duke forward. "Your Grace," she said brightly, "we are honored. I trust the evening finds you well." "Indeed," he replied, his voice calm. "I am grateful for the invitation." His eyes did not leave Eliza as he spoke, and a murmur rippled outward. Arabella straightened, her confidence undimmed, yet newly alert. Their father smiled broadly, already rehearsing gratitude. The room waited. "My lord," Lady Harrington continued, "we have arranged a moment for you to address the company, should you wish." The Duke inclined his head. "I do wish." The words fell like a dropped glass. Silence followed, profound and expectant. He stepped forward, the polished floor echoing beneath his measured pace. Eliza felt the world narrow to the space between them, each breath deliberate. He turned to face the assembly, hands clasped loosely behind his back, the posture of a man accustomed to scrutiny yet indifferent to its comfort. "I am aware," he began, "that my recent conduct has inspired interest." A ripple of restrained amusement followed, quickly stilled by his steady gaze. "It is not my habit to explain myself," he continued, "but neither is it my habit to allow conjecture to define truth." He paused, then turned slightly, his attention unmistakably fixed upon Eliza. The movement was subtle, yet its effect was seismic. Whispers stuttered into silence. "In this room," he said, "are many virtues admired by society. Beauty, lineage, charm. They are worthy qualities. They are not, however, the measure by which I choose my life." Eliza's pulse thundered. She stood utterly still, aware of every eye now flicking between her and Arabella, measuring, comparing, anticipating correction. "I have been advised," the Duke continued evenly, "to marry advantageously. I have been encouraged to select what is most admired." A faint, brittle laugh escaped somewhere near the back. He did not acknowledge it. "But admiration," he said, "is not esteem, and I will not build my future upon applause." He extended his hand. The gesture was neither rushed nor theatrical. It was deliberate, undeniable. His palm faced upward, steady, offered to Eliza alone. "Miss Eliza Ashcombe," he said, her name ringing clear through the stunned air. "Will you walk with me?" The ballroom froze. Arabella's smile faltered, confusion flashing briefly before pride intervened. Their father's face drained of color. Lady Harrington's lips parted, then pressed together. Fans hovered mid-motion. No one breathed. Eliza felt the weight of the moment settle upon her shoulders, heavy with consequence. For an instant, the old instinct urged retreat, invisibility, safety. Then she saw his eyes, resolute, unyielding, quietly asking rather than commanding. She stepped forward. Her hand found his, her glove brushing his skin, and the contact sent a tremor through her that she did not attempt to hide. Together, they stood apart from the crowd, the space around them charged with disbelief. "This," the Duke said calmly, "is my choice." The silence that followed was not empty. It was crowded with shattered expectation. Music resumed, uncertain at first, then stronger, compelled by custom even as meaning fractured. The Duke did not release Eliza's hand as they moved toward the floor, and with every step, society recalibrated itself around a truth it had not anticipated. Yet even as Eliza allowed herself to breathe again, she sensed the cost gathering just beyond the chandelier's glow, waiting to test whether defiance could endure the morning light. The music ended not with a flourish, but with a restrained cadence, as though even the orchestra sensed it had accompanied something irrevocable. Applause followed, hesitant and uneven, born more of habit than enthusiasm. Eliza stood beside the Duke of Ravensmere at the edge of the ballroom, her hand still resting in his, her pulse slowly steadying as the room resumed its breath. Faces turned away too quickly, others lingered with open astonishment, and a few watched with thinly veiled resentment. The world had not shattered, but it had shifted, and such shifts were rarely forgiven. They did not linger. The Duke guided her from the floor with quiet authority, pausing only to bow to Lady Harrington, whose expression hovered between shock and calculation. No congratulations followed them. No one rushed forward with approval. Eliza felt the absence keenly, yet it did not wound as she had expected. There was a strange calm in knowing precisely where she stood, even if that place lay beyond favor. In a smaller antechamber lit by a single candelabrum, they halted. The noise of the ballroom dulled to a distant murmur, like waves retreating from shore. The Duke released her hand at last, though the space between them remained charged. "You need not have done that," Eliza said softly. "Not publicly, not so completely." "I did," he replied. "Anything less would have invited retreat." She studied him, seeing now the cost etched faintly at the corners of his eyes. "They will not be kind," she said. "They were never kind," he answered. "Only polite." A shadow crossed her expression. "My family will adapt," he said gently, "as all who depend on appearances must." She nodded, though uncertainty flickered. "And if they do not?" "Then we will endure," he said simply. The word lingered between them, heavy with implication. Endurance had been Eliza's lifelong companion, but this was different. This promised not mere survival, but shared resistance. Before she could speak, footsteps approached. Her father appeared in the doorway, his face drawn, his pride bruised beyond concealment. He looked from Eliza to the Duke, then bowed stiffly. "Your Grace," he said, "I had hoped." "I know what you hoped," the Duke replied without cruelty. "I regret disappointing you." Eliza's father's gaze shifted to her, searching for something: apology, gratitude, remorse. She offered none. Instead, she met his eyes with calm resolve. After a moment, he inclined his head again and withdrew, diminished yet chastened. Eliza released a breath she had not realized she held. They departed Harrington Hall shortly thereafter, stepping into a night cooled by wind and possibility. The Duke's carriage waited, lanterns glowing like watchful eyes. As Eliza climbed inside, she felt the weight of the evening settle at last, no longer pressing upon her alone. The carriage lurched forward, carrying them away from the glare, toward consequence. News traveled swiftly with the dawn. By morning, the choice had become legend, retold with embellishment and disbelief. Some praised the Duke's conviction. Others condemned his recklessness. Eliza's name appeared in conversations where it had never been spoken before, framed by speculation rather than certainty. Invitations were withdrawn. Doors closed. Others opened tentatively, curiosity outweighing caution. Through it all, the Duke remained constant. He visited without fanfare, spoke with quiet assurance, and listened with an attention that steadied her when doubt threatened to reclaim its ground. There were moments Eliza questioned her courage, when isolation crept close and whispered that she had overreached. In those moments, he did not persuade. He simply stayed. Weeks later, they stood together in the Duke's library, sunlight slanting across shelves lined with histories and unspoken intentions. Eliza traced the spine of the poetry book he had first sent her, its presence now symbolic rather than secret. "Do you regret it?" she asked, the question she had avoided until now. He considered her carefully. "I regret only the years I mistook admiration for meaning," he said. "You reminded me that worth is not conferred by consensus." She smiled, small but certain. "You reminded me," she replied, "that being chosen does not diminish the one who chooses." Outside, the city continued its measured pace, indifferent yet altered. Society would adjust, as it always did, folding defiance into precedent, turning scandal into story. Eliza knew challenges remained, judgments unspoken, alliances withheld, futures recalculated. But she also knew this: when the music had stopped, when the lights dimmed and the whispers sharpened, something enduring had been claimed. That evening, as twilight softened the world beyond the windows, the Duke took her hand once more, not before witnesses, but in quiet promise. The choice that had frozen a ballroom now warmed a shared horizon, and though the path ahead was uncharted, Eliza stepped forward without fear, knowing at last she would not walk unseen.